Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Kobe. I am Becky Taylor, and along with Mr. Wayne McDevitt, we do chair the EICS committee. We have 2 action items today. Our first one, EICS 1, the Innovative School District Update and Negotiation Process with potential innovative school operators for Southside Ashpole Elementary School. And this item, as you know, first came to the board during its conference call meeting on March 19th, just a couple weeks ago. And during that call, Dr. Hall presented his recommendation to the state board to select Achievement for All Children as the innovative school operator for Southside Ashpole Elementary School. That recommendation was presented as discussion and is back before us this month for action. And I think Dr. Hall should be here if he would like to come forward and share any additional information to present to us on this item.
Is he here?
Well,
He didn't quit already, did he?
Yeah, we're running.
oh, I thought it was 2:30.
early.
It's 2:30.
Are you going to entertain us?
No, I'm not going to entertain. Okay. Well, you want me to jump on down and come back?
Jump on down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Here we go. Well, we're going to jump down to a discussion item. How about that? EICS 3.
That's what Ms. Taylor said.
We're going to go to the 2018 Charter School Application Recommendations, and Mr. Alex Quigley is here.
Mr. Walker as well.
Yes, he is. Hello, Mr.
Good afternoon, State Board members. Thank you for having us today. We are here to go ahead and make our presentation of the Charter School Advisory Board's recommendations to the State Board for our schools that we are moving forward for approval and the ones that we are not moving forward to approval. As you'll see in your packet, we have 8 schools that have been recommended to move forward to the ready to open status, and that we seek your approval on those recommendations. I'm not going to talk in detail about each one. I know you've received the minutes and all the materials. Again, and then we have another 11 schools, or actually no, 13 that are we are not moving forward, as well as you'll see on the list. There's been some that you already saw already that were either acceleration requests or fast track requests. I do want to point out again, I think you see more evidence that our board is continuing to just improve in our process and in our work together. And you'll see a lot of alignment in the votes, both on the schools that we recommended to move forward and by and large the schools that we did not approve. So we're coming together when we know it's a school that we feel confident in, and when we feel that sense that the school's not quite ready. We're also very aligned in that. So I feel excited that we're able to really show you a list of recommendations that have a lot of unity and clarity among the board.
I would just like to say I have read all of the minutes, and I'm so impressed with the work. I mean, I just totally trust what y'all are doing. And,
Thank you.
And I think there were 14 that are non-approved. So
Yeah,
13.
sorry.
So there are 8 that we're looking at. They're recommended for approval and 14 for non-approval. Are there any questions for Mr. Quigley or Mr. Walker? Well, being none, this will come back to us next month for action.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Dr. Hall is in the room, right? Oh, Dr. Hall. Okay. So basically, I just kind of gave them an intro that we got this on March 19th, and if you have some additional information to share, we would love to hear that.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Chairman Kobe, Superintendent Johnson, Lieutenant Governor, members of the board, the advisory, and the citizens of North Carolina. My sincere apologies for being late. I had a message that maybe things were a little behind schedule, so I continued to work in my office, and so sorry for the delay. You know, as always, it's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about this ongoing process and where we're at in selecting and identifying the operator for Southside Ashpole Elementary in this first year of operation. You know, as I talk about things today, I want to frame a little bit of the why. Why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? And some of this comes from some of the requests from members of the board who asked me to just share a little bit of the data even that I shared with the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee just a few weeks ago. And so in reflecting on, again, why we're here, philosophical differences aside, everything else, we know that we have some challenges regarding some of our schools. And some of those persistent challenges in schools that are continuously recurring to have low performance. You know, across the state right now, when we release this data each year, that we currently have 505 schools across the state that are low performing. That means almost 1 out of every 5 schools are low performing here in North Carolina based on the definition. We know that of those 505, that 468 are recurring, meaning that over the past 3 years they've been low performing for at least 2 out of 3 years. And we have we have more than 250,000 students being served in low performing schools across the state. As we think about that and we think about the urgency, I also like to look at what do we glean from that data. We know that there's 505 schools, but we also know that in some cases, some schools have more challenges than others. And we look at the fact that right now we have 57 of those schools that not only had an F grade, but had an F not meeting growth. And to me, that is one of the greatest challenges that we can see in a school, because it's a school where we know that we have students that are not proficient in reading and math on grade level, but it's also schools that are not closing the gap because they're not at least meeting or exceeding growth. And we have 7 schools across the state that have been in that situation for at least the last, past 3 years consecutively. So we have challenges. And again, the ISD is only one part of a larger equation about what we do to help support schools across the state. And I take great honor in being able to be a part of this discussion and what we can do. And so as we continue to look at, how do we address, what does it mean to provide a sound basic education to our students, that in the end, the ISD, again, is part of that solution and part of that strategy. And again, we're glad to be a part of that discussion here in North Carolina. As all of you know, we're starting with this first school. It's in Robeson County. Robeson County is one of 73 districts across the state that have a low-performing school, one of 66 counties. So with that, again, we take great pride in being able to start at the grassroots level and working with the community to really prepare what we need to do going into the future to help really turn that school around on behalf of the students, the parents, and the local community. And as we've shared in the past, I'm very proud of the work that we've done at the grassroots level. Engaging the mayor, engaging local leadership, faith leaders, parents, having really a community-wide conversation about what does it mean to come together and do this work as a partner. I started in my very first presentation with the board that it's about partnerships and coming together around a school and doing it in a way that's quite different than any other state. And I remain committed to that work today and being a part of that discussion. But as we start to shift and we start to think about how do we close gaps, we know that when a student is starting out behind, if they're not exceeding in their growth, they're going to stay behind their peers that are in higher performing schools. We know that their likelihood of dropping out is greater if they're in a situation like that where they're not reading by the time they start 4th grade on grade level. And we know the challenges that come with that if they do reach the point of graduation of not having the skills and the competencies necessary to be able to acquire a sustainable wage and make a living wage to be able to have opportunities for them and their families as they go forward. So again, I take this work very seriously, and I stand before you today to talk about this recommendation because we really have to, I have to make a recommendation. The board has to make big decisions. And I respect those decisions, and I respect each of you around this table that have been engaged in this conversation from the very beginning. When we look at Southside Ashpole, and we look at the fact that we've been going through this rigorous process since December of trying to identify and select an operator for the school. Throughout that process, we had an initial evaluation. We went through that process, and we did it based on a definition, really 2 definitions in statute that I want to point to. One is the definition that talks about an organization that has the history or capacity of turning around low-performing schools. They've got a track record of doing that or doing it with a group of students that have a history of being low-performing and not performing on grade level. Or they have a credible plan, and they have a strategy, and they've done work either themselves or through a contracted affiliation with someone that's operated schools in the state for at least the past 3 years. The 2 entities that we have really fall into that second category. They've had some mixed results in some cases, looking at their track record and what they've done. But in the end, when you look at the evaluations, which is what I'm using to base my recommendation on, I look at it as if I'm hiring somebody. I look at an evaluation, and I look at the interview, and I look at all that information together. And many of you have said in places where you've had to hire executive leaders or you've had to hire team members. And in doing so, you look at what are the competencies that somebody comes to the table with. You analyze those competencies and you say, okay, they have all of these things. Maybe these things aren't quite as strong. Do we build the competency? Or maybe we just didn't understand whether they've got the competency or not based on the evaluation, and we have to continue to build that understanding. That's why we went into the second round of the evaluation. we went deeper to see what other things we could learn and what things did we not necessarily discover in the first round so that we could get that clarity. So in doing that, we had the two organizations that you're familiar with. The Remind Group, which is a for-profit entity based in Michigan that has one school operating as a charter in Cumberland County. And then we have Achievement for All Children, which is a newly established nonprofit that has a contractual relationship with Team CFA, who operates a network of 13 charter schools here in North Carolina. And so from those two, we went through an extensive evaluation process that was actually conducted by our partners at SchoolWorks. And I have Kim Weston Heiser, who is the president of SchoolWorks, who you've met once before when we first started this evaluation process. And she's here, and she's going to talk a little bit more about what the process has been and the rigor that's been used as we've navigated going through to this point of making a recommendation. And so if I could ask Kim to step forward, that would be great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Kim Weston Heiser. I'm the president of SchoolWorks, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit this afternoon about the rigorous evaluation process that we employed as we assessed the capacity of the two organizations, the Remind Group and Achievement for All Children. At SchoolWorks, we have a philosophy that we begin all of our projects, and we expect all of the individuals that work with students and families to start with the end in mind. So when we evaluate an application, what we're really looking at is establishing a process and taking them through a process that is going to replicate the high standards, public accountability, and public transparency that we expect they'll be held to throughout their implementation of the model. So when we designed our evaluation process, it was intentional in that we did not want to set the bar low. We set a very, very high bar for the evaluation process. That meant that when we evaluated their application and their written materials, when we spoke to them during the capacity interview process, when we solicited feedback from community panel members, what we were looking for and telling them is that it's not enough just to say a standard statement filled with jargon that is just generally going to indicate that you know what you're going to do. What we wanted is detail. We wanted information. We wanted process. We wanted reassurance. We wanted commitment. And so we sought that at every step of the evaluation process. So as Dr. Hall indicated, we first evaluated the written application materials that they submitted in response to the application published by the ISD. And what we did through that process was generate a list of questions for clarification that we had. And our first step at gaining more clarification from each of those entities was to conduct a capacity interview. Okay. Those capacity interview questions were also supplemented with questions that emerged from background checks that we internally at SchoolWorks committed through another party, Hire Right, to get a sense of any criminal history, educational qualifications, and financial checks. We did interviews with the organization school leadership to probe more around all of that. I personally had phone calls with members of the community panel to get their independent thoughts and evaluations from the community presentations that the entities gave within the local community. And then we went through a process of evaluating all that information and further identifying additional questions for clarification. Right? And again, all of those clarifications was really a dialogue to say we are setting a very high standard in this evaluation process because we're communicating to you that you will have a high standard to meet in educating the students of Southside Ashpole. Once we identified those additional questions, we continued through this negotiations process and requesting additional documentation and information in writing about how they were going to meet those standards and expectations, and continued dialogue with those entities. Once we received all that information, SchoolWorks then updated our final evaluation document and submitted that to the ISD. So as you can see, it was a multi-phase, multi-tiered approach that really relied on written documentation and articulation of how they were going to serve the students of Southside Ashpole, their families, and that community. We solicited verbal information and tried to get a sense of their commitment to the state, to the community, to those students. And then we did our due diligence in terms of criminal background checks and all the required qualifications of each of the entities that applied. So that's a little bit of the summary of our evaluation process, again, resulting in the 2 evaluation reports that have been submitted to you. And so with that being said, I'll step aside, let Dr. Hall continue, and I'll stick around if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Kim. And again, I think this is just a testament to the process that we've used. I mean, we've held a very high standard throughout, and we'll continue to do that. But I think where we are today, having gone through this rigorous process, I want to also tease out, because I know this has been an evolving discussion, and in some cases providing clarity on how the operator is really designed within this framework. If you look at the slide, we have 2 roles outlined here: what the operator is doing, and then what does the ISD do. You know, the ISO is going to select and hire the school leader. They provide the curriculum and instructional model to be used at the school. Through that instructional model, they're there to provide the coaching and the reinforcement of the skills that we want to develop in our talent working at the school. And they support the school leader in that work to help transform the school itself. The ISD will actually employ the teachers and support staff at the school. So those will be employees of the ISD. And in turn, what we're talking about when we say that, we're talking about they're our employees. They're employees of the state board. They're employees of the state, just like any other local LEA. And so as our employees, we obviously want to make sure we find a match that supports our educators, that supports our team and delivers to them the best instructional support and coaching possible to help improve outcomes for students. The ISD also administers all funds. This is quite different than most other models. The funds do not go to the operator. The operator actually gets paid through the contract for employing the principal and any management fee that they may have involved in that. But as far as the funds themselves, just like any other LEA, ISD will draw down the state funds, like any other LEA, and administer those funds at the state level. And so I think that's an important distinction here as we talk about some differences between the models. We will also monitor and assess and provide oversight. This is where the accountability comes in. Because the operator plays one role, the ISD plays a bigger role. And I'll show you a model that helps to sketch all this out in a way that shows you an organizational structure. But ultimately, in the end, we continue to partner with the local community. This is where customer service comes in. We are the customer service manager to make sure that parents, families, and the local community are getting the benefit of what an operator and the ISD come together with in serving a school. The way that looks, this might look a little complicated, but we tried to sketch this out to, again, tease out how this model looks on paper. At the very top, you have the State Board of Education and the state superintendent. The ISD falls under the administration of that body. The ISD, as the 116th LEA in the state, then manages the innovative school operator that is under contract with the State Board of Education. That operator is hiring the principal or the school leader, and we will obviously, through that operator, ensure that the principal is delivering and supporting our educators. Again, our public school educators that are in that school that we would hire are being supported by that school principal and the operator themselves. And then the ISD will have a direct relationship and partnership with the local school system for other support services, like custodial services, food services, and transportation, and any other services that we would see to be important in the operation of the school. That's where I go back and say it's a partnership, because you can see that there are multiple roles and multiple functions being orchestrated in this model. But in the end, you know, the operator plays a specific role, and it goes back to those responsibilities that I shared just a little bit ago. In the end, I stand here before you today to provide a final recommendation. Based on the evaluation results and looking at the capacity, I looked at the curriculum and instructional plan provided by both entities. And when I look at even the budget plan and how we compensate and provide, competitive compensation to our employees and to the school leader, the budget plan, looking at the engagement and the commitment to support the local community and to be a strong partner, the goals for addressing the whole child and wraparound services, and the things that I think are really important from any partner is what is their organization's overall responsiveness when we ask for information or for clarity. That's what you want from a good partner, is somebody that's going to step forward and respond to things when you need it. Because in this process, we are going to continue to learn. Year 1, year 2, year 3, good organizations are learning organizations, and that's what we have to be, and that's what we expect our partners to be in this process. And so with that, I do recommend Achievement for All Children. When we had our call just a couple weeks ago, I mentioned there were some remaining items that needed to be addressed. They did provide a signed contract between AAC and Team CFA, which was one of the requirements that was, outlined in the documentation. They have provided supplemental detail. One of the pieces that was extremely important to me and was identified in the evaluation from SchoolWorks were things like psychological services. Because we know that we have to have the evaluations and everything required for our EC students. They've made sure that they explained and show where they have the funds in there for those evaluations and the contracted services for speech language services, which again are going to be very critical in this model. So through all of that, again, I stand here today to recommend achievement for all children. You know, moving forward, we have a great deal of work ahead of us. And I think with that, Ms. Taylor, I can conclude my comments, and I enter my official recommendation, and I will sit down and wait to see if there's any questions from the board.
I'd appreciate that. If Kim and Dr. Hall will stay close, we've all had time to consider, not a lot of time, to consider his recommendation as well as the evaluation for AAC prepared by SchoolWorks. I do appreciate the process, and I've been on calls with SchoolWorks, and I've been very impressed with your objectivity and your professionalism and your depth of knowledge, so thank you for your work. So this time I'd like to open the floor to see if there are any questions or comments from board members who would like to weigh in or just ask questions.
I have a question.
Dr. Oxendine?
Dr. Hall, you and I had talked about this a few days ago and probably even before last week. But I want to be, my concern about the proposal has to do with the curriculum. And we know that school needs a specific kind of teaching approach and a curricular approach. And it just isn't clear enough for me. I've done some research on core knowledge. I remember that model going back several years ago, but if I could be sure that you're going to get back with AAC and say, go back to the drawing board, because I think Southside Ashpole needs something more basic, traditional, clear, cogent. I can't think of any other adjectives. Because I'm lost in this. Core knowledge seems to be more philosophical than it does practical. So talk with me through that. And I'm going to say to you, I even asked our principal of the year to take a look at the proposal from the eyes of a principal who's turned around a school. I think you've gone from a low, down a D to a B.
42.5.
Yeah. So I asked Jason if he would take a look at the instructional, the curricular piece of the proposal. And I mean, if you want to, I just want to be sure we can improve it, I guess is my point.
So before I even talk about the instructional programming, you know, I'm not convinced based on what I read that this aligns with general statute. You know, AAC's been in existence for 1 year, so it's hard to say, you know, at least for the first part of that, you know, they have a track record of results. Can you elaborate on that?
I can, because if you look at the statute itself, it actually allows for two provisions.
Correct.
So one option is that they have a proven track record, or the other is that, and let me go to the slide, or, and it's not an and, it's an or, is if they don't have that track record themselves, that they can have a contractual relationship with an organization that has had at least a credible and specific plan for dramatically improving student achievement in a low-performing school. And so their contractual relationship between AAC and CFA is what would meet the intent legislatively. And I have reviewed that with the state board attorneys to make sure that we're in alignment.
Well, just a few minutes ago, you made a comment they have mixed results. This is a school that's at 27% proficient. I don't know that we can afford to have an operator that has mixed results to try to move a school that's at 27%.
And I think if we were looking at the structure, and where I have more confidence than anything, is in the organizational model, because we're not asking an operator to do this on their own. What we're saying is that with very strict accountability and strict monitoring, and the ability to make tweaks along the way that we need to if something's not working, this is not simply handing over the keys and saying in 5 years we want to see if you did it. This is what are we doing to be in there day in and day out to hold them accountable. And if we have an operator that's not turning the school in the direction that we need, my next task is to stand before this board and say that we have an operator that's not delivered on the commitments not only to this board, but more specifically to the commitments that we've made to the town of Roland and that community to deliver outcomes that are important. So the accountability piece of this is more rigorous than probably anything else that we have.
Can you elaborate on the instructional programs? I know in the report it talks about Singapore math. which is, a research-based method for helping students with math. But talk to me specifically about literacy.
So they have a heavy dependence on core knowledge in their program. They look at that. They have it staggered based on their K through 2 and K through 3 model, leaning on the core knowledge curriculum that would be provided through their relationship with Team CFA and the coaching for implementation. In addition to that, they have an instructional program that uses their teachers that are the specials for like music, art, and other areas to do push-ins or to do breakouts and other things that are going to help build the core content, not only the core content knowledge for ELA and for math using Singapore, but on the literacy piece, being able to pull apart and use specific strategies to reinforce instructional strategies around literacy. And I think those are things that when you look at what they've done, they provided research from a study and about outcomes that were achieved in New York, where there was a study that showed the outcomes in reading using this curriculum. And from that study, it did show that, again, the outcomes were pretty significant.
How about the plans for addressing students that are, at risk? I mean, once again, you got a population of students at 99%. I mean, the report, specifically on page 13, says that there's limited research that supports that, AAC has had proven results with students at risk. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think if you look at AAC alone, because of the situation with them being a new entity, we have to lean on the contract with Team CFA and what those outcomes look like. And again, there have been some mixed results, but at the same time, they've had some places of success in being able to improve outcomes for students in their network of schools. I think the instructional coaching and the things that they propose in their model, the kind of support that CFA wants to bring in to support not only the teachers but the school leader, I think those things combined create a package that gives us the ability to drive some significant outcomes. And when we talk about the proficiency rates, their combined proficiency was actually 18.4 in reading and math. So we know we've got a situation that's critical, it needs attention, and we want to continue to support that partnership and see some things happen. But I think looking at the two operators that we had apply, looking at where we are in this process, and based on the merits of the evaluation itself, looking at within this framework and within this structure, I've got confidence that we can make sure we turn the corner. Again, if it's just not dependent on any individual. And this also, to me, the biggest pivot in this entire equation is going to be the selection of the school leader.
Specifically on page 9, there's a talk about lack of addressing climate and culture. I can tell you, from taking a school at 42.5 to 71.4, that's the first thing we had to address. So if you would elaborate how your team or SchoolWorks plans to address the climate and culture of the school.
Well, first thing is that they have a strong commitment, and we've heard this, I think, through the capacity interviews and everything else, is having a strong commitment to being able to engage the community in the process. And I do think that's going to be critical. If you're in this town and you see the town itself, this school is really the center of that community. The pride that's in that community for this school, they have an alumni center right across the street. So to me, that's a strong sign of focusing on culture when you have a commitment to the local community and wanting to engage parents and others. I think the other part is the way that they talk about supporting our educators. Because again, these are our educators. This is not an operator's team. This is our educators in that school that we're entrusting to an organization to come in and support, coach, and teach. So culture is going to be something that we're in there. That's why I go back to customer service. The customers are going to be the students, the parents, and that local community. And if the culture is not right, we will know very quickly, not only based on what's happening inside the building, but what's happening across that community and with the satisfaction that parents and others may have regarding the school.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? I can tell you have analyzed that, and I appreciate your research on that from our principal of the year. Very good. Ms. Willoughby?
I just have a question. If Team CFA is going to operate the schools, why didn't they apply to be one of the organizations to be considered for operating the school?
That one, I would be hard-pressed to give you an explicit answer. My understanding is that AAC was being established, and some of this I think came out during the capacity interview, was being established with a focus on trying to help improve outcomes in low-performing schools. And
So
it was a slightly different mission, and so it was created with the intent of being able to do this kind of work. And CFA,
What was created with that intent?
I think AAC as an organization, their focus is trying to help improve, I think, low-performing schools. And so their intent around this work was creating an organization that was dedicated to that, while CFA has been more dedicated to the charter school efforts. Does that sound correct, Ken?
That's correct. They spoke in the capacity interview about the focus on helping to students who had not historically served well, as opposed to utilizing a charter school model to provide an alternate option.
But they feel like Team CFA will be successful at this school. So that, I mean, I'm having trouble connecting those dots and understanding the role of AAC. If Team CFA, I feel like I'm talking in code, Team CFA is going to do the work. I'm having trouble understanding why they didn't just apply to do the work to start with.
Well, I think one of the biggest
And you may not be able to explain that, and that's fine. You can
And I
say-
definitely, and I apologize. I definitely don't want to speculate, but my perception would be that AAC would be the one, obviously, in this model, employing the principal. CFA and their relationship with AAC would be the ones providing the curriculum, the coaching, and the instructional support, as well as an additional contractor that AAC is using called Leaders Building Leaders to help support the principal in other areas as well.
Okay, so what does AAC get out of this contract?
The biggest thing is, a management fee that I would assume would be covering their operational costs for doing the work and supporting any other expenses that they would be providing as a manager through their management fee.
But you ultimately are going to be managing.
We will ultimately be managing their contract and ensuring that they deliver on the commitments that are being made. And through their contractual relationship with the principal that they hire, we'll be managing and supporting that principal.
Seems like another layer.
All right, I believe Mr. Alcorn was next, and then Dr. Oxendine.
Real
Okay.
quick, I mean, we're sailing uncharted waters here. And we'll have probably as many questions as we do answers. I can just reflect on it from a business standpoint. If I would have never gotten any business because I didn't have experience in that industry, I wouldn't be sitting here, that's for sure. But I tell you, I've talked to Dr. Eric Hall probably more than any other person in a position of a superintendent, and I'm putting my faith in him on this. And it is, I know you say it's not one person, but there is one coach or quarterback or general manager or whatever analogy you want to put it in. And I think we're so far down the road right now, we've got to do something. We've got to make decisions. We don't have options except for the ones that he's recommending, and I'm putting my faith in him. So that's all I want to say.
Well, and I'd like for us to continue talking, but you're right. We have his, I want us to all talk. He may come up with some other ideas. I mean, I like this discussion. We really haven't had an opportunity to have a discussion, and this is what we need to do, is have a healthy, respectful discussion. Was there anyone else before I go back this way? Yes, Governor.
I was just going to really just piggyback on that. We're looking at 505 schools with a grade or DRF, 468 recurring low-performing schools, and we're talking about one. And we're talking about doing something, trying to do something that's innovative. I mean, I think it's kind of a courageous move for any legislative body to try to do anything innovative, because that just generally doesn't happen. And I think we're looking at one opportunity to do something innovative. I don't think we should be scared of that. I don't think that should frighten us at all. I think if we knew the solution to this problem, we wouldn't have 505 low-performing schools. We wouldn't have 468 of them recurring. We would have figured it out by now. And the fact that we haven't figured it out by now means we need to try some things. And when you try some things and you try to innovate, sometimes it doesn't go the way that's planned. I hope this does, and I trust Eric as well, that it's going to move in the right direction. And we have to move on faith in some of these things. And I think that's what we should do here. And I think, again, we're going to have a lot of questions, and it's going to unfold over time. But we haven't figured it out yet. And this is one more opportunity to try to do that.
Okay.
Hi, yeah,
Mr. McDonough.
just trying to get some context to this. First of all, I think we can be proud of the history of innovation in this state. We have, I just did off the top of my head here, we have regional schools. They're doing some good work. We have the North Carolina Virtual Public School that at that time was innovative, and quite frankly, I was nervous. We have charter schools, and if you don't think that was a nervous time in the mid-90s, it was a nervous time. We have online charters. We have early college. We have STEM schools. We have lab schools. I'm not sure that a lab school at UNC Pembroke wasn't the answer here, but that's a different thing. They didn't apply. We have, the whole idea of global ready schools and the designation of that. We have teams that go into Harnett County and other places. We have the cooperative innovative schools. we have innovation going on in the schoolroom that doesn't fit some title or some thing, but innovation right there in a teacher and in the school building. We have innovative programs like Teaching Fellows and North Carolina Center for Advancement of Teaching, which was the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and a lot of and early childhood education. The Lieutenant Governor is leading in digital learning and trying to make sure we're ahead of the curve on that. So I would say that we can be proud of this. But now we have another opportunity to be innovative. I would say that this is a big decision. It's a precedent. So I think we have to enter it carefully. I entered when I saw ASD, and I said ASD 2 years ago, I think it was, or whatever one that was. I went and looked at history and experience in other states, and I'll be candid, not a fan. And then the legislature passed the law, and I said, I'm going to try to be a fan. and then the ISD, Innovative School District, came along, and still, confidence level low. I think it's important that we do our due diligence. And Dr. Hall, you came along, and I commend your process. I know your due diligence. I know the transparency. I know the pace that you've worked at. But I'm not. There are too many unanswered questions for me. There's curriculum, and there are questions about the who the contract is with, and how we amend that, or when is the deadline that says this is not working, and who comes in here and says it's not working, and who's the contract with? The state contracts with an operator then contracts with a provider, I guess is what CFA team is, and so I just am still have a lot of concerns about assuring that that we do the right thing here, and I'm not there. Again, I will tell you that I too have. I want to say this. I have confidence in Schoolworks' due diligence as well. I will say to you that if I got this right at our last meeting, when we were talking about, I'm looking at all kinds of notes here. You said that they had to meet on the criteria they were graded, I guess is the way to say that, on 3 things. One was does not meet expectations, then partially meets expectations, and meets expectations. I would have hoped that we had this huge volume of applicants that said dramatically, drastically, significantly exceeds expectations, because I would hope that coming out of the blocks, given the narrative in this nation about this and the narrative around this, that I want to be a fan. I really want to be a fan. And I really am someone who has voted against some things before and am now a big fan of those things. So I want to be real clear. I think that the innovative piece is there, but I think that we've got to be very, very sure that we're coming out of the blocks right, because it is one school, but we're going to very quickly use that model, I'm assuming, or other models, or maybe there is another model. I don't know.
Ms. White and then Mr. Davis.
Given a lot of thought and had conversations with many of you, I think one of the things that brought better perspective for me, Dr. Hall, was the flow chart that you provided, and that's on slide 10 of the presentation. And that clearly puts the Board of Education and the state superintendent at the top of the triangle, and it allows Dr. Hall and the operator that's hired and the principal and the director to follow under our direction. And I know that the common goal of this board is to make sure that the students at Southside Ashpole have the very best education possible. And so I think our concerns are valid in some points, but I think you've got a checks and balances system here. And that Eric Hall's been very transparent in the months of conversations that he's had, not only with the community, but also with us about what's going on and what has been done to do the work. So Greg, you couldn't have said it any better. There has to be a first for somebody, and there has to be a first school. And I will say that I talked to Dr. Hall, and I said, why in the world are we not putting 4 or 5 schools in this first year? And he said, hold up. He said, we want to make sure that we do this and that we do it correctly. And so with one, we have the opportunity to have additional input from us, from the excellent educators that we have within our department, and an operator who we did not have 100 applications. We wanted 100 applications, but we did not have them. And we had 2 that said, I want to take on this challenge. And I think that says a lot, that they separated themselves from the other operators, that they said, I'm willing to take on this challenge. So, I'm going to have to say that I'm going to have to support your recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Davis?
Dr. Hall, it sounds like we're really hiring AAC and Team CFA. Is that correct?
We're hiring AAC, who has their contract with CFA. So you're basically getting the services of both organizations through this model.
Based on your answers to Mr. Griffin, most of the answers to fill the gap for AAC were Team CFA.
A lot of the curriculum instruction is definitely.
So did SchoolWorks evaluate Team CFA?
So they evaluate the application that had elements of CFA, their curriculum, their instructional program, and what they proposed with the instructional coaching. So in essence, they evaluated AAC's plan on how they're going to utilize Team CFA in that process. Is that a fair response, Kim?
Yes, I would simply add that we also looked at the results from Team CFA schools.
That's true.
And we conducted due diligence background checks on key stakeholders within the Team CFA organization. In addition, they participated in the capacity interview that occurred during the negotiations document, so they were very present throughout the evaluation process.
So how many schools has Team CFA turned around? Or how many are they working on?
So right now they have a network of 13 schools in North Carolina, and some of them have, very strong outcomes, and some, I would say, are emerging.
I think it would help me to see that data on where were those schools, where are they now, that sort of thing. So SchoolWorks evaluation then, if I understand your reply, included AAC with their partner Team CFA.
So if you look at page 7 of the report, the schools that are present in that graph include Team CFA schools.
Okay.
Okay.
So that means on page 2 of the report, AAC with Team CFA met the expectations on 4 criteria. Partially met on 6 and failed to meet on 1.
If you're looking at the fact that AAC is heavily depending on CFA's resources and being able to build up this operation in this model, you could look at that, especially in the area of record of results.
Well, I'm just reading the report. I'm just going on SchoolWorks, evaluation. That's what I'm going on. And considering that the students at this school fit the category that they did not meet expectations, I'm all for giving somebody a first chance. But I'm not for risking the education of over 300 students just to give some adults a first chance. Go pick another school. Go pick another state. I'm willing to take the criticism from anyone who wants to complain about the board not approving this to defend the students of Southside Ashboro. I think they deserve better. I think they deserve an operator who has a demonstrated track record, if not of turning around schools, at least turning around groups of students. And I can't find that in the evaluation. I hear they're great people, that I'm sure they are. I'm sure they have the best of intentions. But if I was opening a business, would I put my faith and trust? I don't think so. So help me.
that an opportunity for me to respond, or?
Well, I can't get comfortable with the recommendation based on those gaps.
So I think in the end, and I would go back to, the comment from Ms. White, is that we have protocols in here to make sure that we do not slip backwards. I mean, the fact is, this operator stepping forward, they were one of two that stood up. It not only went through the first round of the process, but I think went through a very rigorous public process with significant accountability to stand in this space with us. Fact is, we've never had this type of school turnaround model in the state. So to evaluate somebody based on what we're doing in this particular case is kind of uncharted territory because we have not done this kind of model before, especially where there's these degrees of accountability in place. We've seen charters, we've seen other models come forward for innovation, but the governance structure is quite different, and the accountability structure is completely different in how that's handled. So I think there are some safeguards. I think as we're, starting to implement something new, the part that I'm, unyielding on is the accountability of anybody that's going to partner with us in this space. And I think the same priorities that you're placing, Mr. Davis, on behalf of the students in that school, I would say that my priorities are as higher because I'm the one that's going to have to be in that school day in and day out with the educators and supporting our teachers to make sure that we're getting the impact that we need from the operator to do this work. So the priorities there for me are just as high as anybody.
Yeah, I don't question that at all, Dr. Hall. In fact, like my colleague, Mr. Alcorn, you are the reason, you are the success story thus far, and you have my total support.
Me too.
Mm-hmm. Absolute, total support. In fact, if I could write the law, you'd pick the principal. We'd support you with the people necessary to hire the teachers, give you the financial support, and hold you accountable.
I second the motion.
I mean, you are the kind of leader we need running this innovative approach. And I say that with full confidence on you. I just don't have confidence based on what I've read about this operator. I mean, for me, it's pretty obvious why we only got 2 respondents. It's new and innovative. Well, there's 3 reasons. New and innovative. 2, turnaround of any kind is incredibly hard.
So hard.
To the Lieutenant Governor's point, we haven't gotten it right yet, really. We've had flashes of brilliance thanks to hardworking people like Mr. Griffin and others across districts in our state. But we haven't really cracked this nut yet. And then third, the economics of this thing don't work. That's why organizations like KIP and others who run large numbers of charter schools who tend to focus on students similar to the ones at Southside Asheville, they didn't apply. So I got concerns with the recommendation. I clearly think we can't go backwards. And I'm with you, Dr. Oxnine. We can't go backwards to.
No.
We got to find a solution, in my opinion, somewhere between those two.
Right.
In order to move forward. Because the children of this school, they need our best, not 4 out of 11. They need better than that.
You want to say something?
One of the things that I would suggest to the board members is to take a day, go to Southside Ashpole, spend some time. You still have some time. School hasn't ended yet. We have about 6 weeks left. So you're going to see Ashpole, Southside Ashpole, very busy in instruction, getting ready for all the state tests. So go in the classroom, sit there don't flash in and leave in 10 minutes, stay about an hour, so you can get a sense of how teaching looks, how interaction between the teacher and student looks, so you can get a sense of the resources that I hope are there. They probably aren't for this school. I would imagine Southside Ashpole fits in. I'm looking at this frame that has 7 schools in North Carolina received a letter grade of F and did not meet growth for the last 3 years. That's a Southside Ashpole, right?
Actually, they are not. Several of those schools are middle schools, in fact, that the ISD cannot engage in.
So we know that, and I know some of the teachers in that school. I know them personally, and they're fine people. They're good people. I don't know the principal. I've met her I've met the principal a couple of times, but get in the school. It may take some of you a long, long time to get there. And meet the teachers, spend some time on the floor with the students, listen to them read, get a sense of what they know about mathematics, and you will know that something different has got to happen in that school. We know that what's currently happening hasn't met their needs, just hasn't met their needs. I'm not going to get involved in right now. I mean, pretty soon we're going to take a vote on this, and I'm not going to pick apart team. What is it?
Team CFA
I'm not
or
going to pick
AAC.
apart all the outcomes, the rating outcomes that Schoolworks has done on AAC, and ask questions about the relationship. I understand that's important, but I'm looking at the here and now. That school today in Robeson County, and you've got about 300, not quite 300 students in that
About 260.
school that are not doing well educationally. Now, I'm willing to go the distance with AAC. You know why? Because I have confidence in Eric Hall. He has spent untold time down in Robeson County getting to meet the citizens, meeting the parents. I mean, when anything that you've read about the importance of building relationships with partners, he exemplifies that. He is more than the theory around that. He's the practical. And I'm sure that they're going to look to Eric Hall, the role in North Carolina, the mayor, the parents, the city officials, the county commissioners in Robeson County, the local school board members. They're all anticipating something good is going to happen in Robeson County in that school next year. And the other schools in Robeson County, the principals, the teachers, they will learn from this. This is and this is part of the reason for the law, to create this kind of zone concept. So I'll go back. I know I'm repeating myself ad nauseum, but my best suggestion is I would invite you and strongly encourage you to come to Robeson County. I'll be a part of your tour and spend some time in that school.
Okay, I would like to say something because, you know, what I'm hearing, I mean, I think we really are all on the same page for the end result. There's no doubt about that. One thing that's jumping out at me just today and hearing the presentation and hearing Dr. Oxendine, who is from that area and who is a fabulous educator and knows curricula, who has concerns about curricula, and you're saying that's what you're counting on getting from them is the core knowledge curricula. That's the piece that you're looking for from them. So the piece that we're getting from them is not their strength, right?
Well, this wasn't it that they actually met expectations based on the evaluation from Schoolworks.
But I think core knowledge is probably great in some communities. Dr. Oxendine is saying that is not a good match, and that piece needs to be tweaked a little. So that concerns me a little bit. You have done a fabulous job, and I know right now we have just a couple options. We're either going to approve or not approve. If we don't approve, then the children are sitting there with nothing, which we don't want to happen. And right now, hearing the presentation this morning from talking about the teachers in their classrooms, they don't have teachers in their classrooms. We know that, the 3 E's work. Excellent educators in our schools every day. We could put an excellent principal there. Jason, if you want to move, we can talk to you. An excellent principal and hire excellent teachers, recruit. That alone would make a change. And then under, strong leadership. I'm concerned that we're looking at approving, at this point, an operator who's bringing the piece that's probably not the best fit.
And if I can respond to that, well, the operator doesn't, and this goes into how we look at operator recruitment even going forward, is reimagining what an operator can look like. To me, again, the real linchpin in this whole equation is the school leader. Mm-hmm. And AAC's commitment to the local community and to the ISD is that they will work with us to identify a proven leader. And to me, that's where, again, the real rubber hits the road, is that school leader, individuals like Mr. Griffin, going to step up and be able to be with us in that school to help lead that school, and the operator supports them in delivering on what we're holding that operator accountable to doing. And that accountability piece is huge. I mean, this is, again, it's not just handing keys over for 5 years and seeing what happens. It's us being engaged, keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening on a regular basis in that school, being present, and empowering a great leader to turn that school around.
Okay, and then I would really, when I look at your chart and I see us at the top with our state superintendent, I'd love to hear from you, Superintendent, on your view of choosing this operator, being a good match, and tell me how you think core knowledge will be the curricula for them. What is your opinion?
This has been a rigorous process. It's been going on since last year. I have sat in on some of this process. I know a lot of this process actually took place in the community as well. So I have confidence in the process. I have confidence in Dr. Hall, confidence in the process that this board has implemented with Dr. Hall, and confidence in his recommendation.
What about the core knowledge? What is your view on that? The curriculum that we're looking at for this population?
I have confidence in this recommendation. I have confidence in the curriculum. I have confidence in Dr. Hall and confidence in this recommendation.
I think we all have confidence in the process, and we have confidence in you.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling comfortable at this point going forward with this, but I am not in favor of a delay. So, you know, that makes it difficult. It's like, are we voting for not to have a delay? Or it's difficult. And I wish there were an opportunity to have a transition year where we had hired a strong principal, strong teachers, you're helping manage, maybe contract out, maybe from AAC, Team CFA. If you're feeling superintendent says that's a strong curriculum. If that's a good match, maybe we look at contracting just a piece of curriculum. Yes, Chairman Covey.
We've been through a rigorous process, and those children in Robinson County at that school, can do better.
Yes.
And we've had a lot of questions. A lot of questions are going to have to be answered as we go on. But I, for one, believe we're at a point that we can take a calculated risk and go forward with Dr. Hall's recommendation. I'm willing to stick my neck out on that, and maybe a majority of the board is, maybe majority is not, but that's where I stand.
Any other comments or questions?
I hate to go back in the weeds, but I need to. I need to know, what is the trigger and who is it that comes in here and says, this is not working? There have been people who have stood right there and said, this is a pilot. And here we are years later, and it's still out there. And I'm just saying, I don't know what the trigger is. What causes who? Is that you? Is that the superintendent? Is that this board collectively? Who comes in here and says, and what triggers that? What can I look at in terms of some measure?
So there'd actually be a couple of different models. One of the first models is using a contract monitoring tool to see, are they living up to the requirements in the contract? Are they doing what they said they would do? Part of that process could be, are there things that we say, hey, as an operator, you've got 30 days to rectify this issue? Some of it could be outcomes-based, as we're looking at progress monitoring data. If we don't see benchmarks being hit, do we talk about it this quarter, but we're not going to talk about it next quarter if it's not addressed? Those are all things that we can build into a process of accountability that goes beyond any other model that I'm aware of in this state.
So one option would be to approve your recommendation, and hearing some of this other, maybe approve the recommendation with some stipulations, as we do with charters that we approve, safeguards, since, there's Again, I don't know what the consensus is in this room, but that's another option to consider.
Sure. Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Just one final comment. You know, we heard from Mr. Quigley this morning, and it was just interesting to me. I thought about how the process has evolved because there are many fewer charter schools recommended for approval because what I think the recognition was we need to get it right before we open the school. And, you know, I read some of his comments that were picked up in the press a while ago, and you know, I think there's something to learn there. You know, in the haste to open something, you don't want to not have everything as right as it can be. And I understand this is a new process. You know, I'm still struggling to understand the two entities' roles in this, and I think that gets to your accountability question. It has nothing to do, you know, I'm a big fan and
Yes, ma'am.
have a lot of confidence in you like everybody does. But, you know, I don't want to trade one thing for another if I don't have some pretty good assurances that it's going to work. I understand we need to make some change for these children, but, you know, it's sort of like, you know, if I'm trying to cut back my calories, am I better off eating a Snickers bar or a Mars bar? Neither one of those are good choices. So, you know, I think we've just got to be really cautious about how we approach this.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
did get a text saying I said Harnett County a while ago, and I meant to say Halifax
Oh,
County.
okay, I missed it.
And that does point out that I just want to either tell folks or remind folks that have been here a while, that's you, Tricia,
Thank you.
that this board went in every school in Harnett County, and Halifax County,
Halifax, right.
and others. So, you know, and I know the heart of the board, and I know we're trying different approaches, and we're finally. I think Eric, you said that this is just hard, and getting from where we need to be. I mean, Halifax County is a good example, and we're now beginning to make that kind of progress. I hope the Lieutenant Governor mentioned 500 schools. And we've got to do this. We got to do something. Not just here, but in 500. And so there's a precedent here that we're going to establish that I think is real important.
All right, I think we have a final from our Teacher of the Year. Now we've heard our Principal of the Year, Ms. Scott.
Well, I just want to say I have been to South Pole, Ash, and have gone in classrooms, and I've met with the teachers, and I've met the principal, and it is a precious, precious community, and I want the best for those kids and for those teachers. And so if we go forward with this, and I'm just going to say it, I'll put it out there, if we go forward with this, I know that it is an innovative measure. It's risky. And sometimes when we do things like that, we tend to not want to see when things aren't going right, and we kind of tend to keep it secret, and we try to not let anybody know that things are going wrong. My hope is that we have complete transparency if we do accept this leader that we're wanting to put in there to guide the schools, that if we see that something is not going right, that we are honest and we address it immediately, and that we just be honest and forthright with the decisions that we're making, because these kids deserve honesty and they deserve transparency. So just, you know, I'm just asking that we all be very honest in this process moving forward, and not be afraid to admit failures. And, you know, failures are some of the best lessons I've ever learned, and have helped me become stronger. So if we do have you know, something that comes up, if the curriculum is not what it needs to be, then let's admit it and move forward and find something that does work. But just let's be honest through this process.
Okay, Dr. Oxendine wanted a final, but
Just a final comment. Aside from the curriculum, the curriculum with focused deliberation and thinking can be fixed, can be strengthened. I have no doubt about that. But something with regard to the budget, the AAC needs to spend more money in the infrastructure of that school, the instructional infrastructure. By that I mean, I know somewhere in the proposal I read that the recommendation is to hire one instructional coach. PD is going to be very important. and supporting teachers. So what I would recommend to AAC is to hire more than one instructional coach. Probably one per grade level would be ideal, at least 2 for the entire school.
It's, if I can respond, I think some of that is going to be who's hired directly, and then through the relationship with Team CFA, they'll be providing instructional coaches on top of that for the implementation of the curriculum.
Good.
Okay, Ms. White.
Just a question about accountability. And not having read a proposed contract, is there a rubric for accountability and a timeline for, or a metric for assessing success? I mean, at this point, with a school that has a very low performance rate, any intervention has the opportunity for success.
Yeah.
And so our job will be to take a look at that and say, okay, was it brand new principal, new staff, renewed energy, maybe some additional funds, or was it curriculum, and how do you make the distinction between the two? So I'd want us to be very careful about putting some wording in the contract to hold feet to the fire, but also to make sure that we have the data to make that assessment of what success looks like. And as we say, we have students performing well, and sometimes it doesn't always show up on a test score.
Right. Okay. Final, Mr.
Sure.
Davis?
Yeah. Dr. Hall, could you go back to slide 9?
I have to look at my slide numbers real quick. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Just two back. Two back.
Two back the other way?
Yeah. There you go.
All right.
So on the right-hand side, you're gonna hire the teachers.
So the way the statute reads is that once the school leader is identified, we will work together to identify the teachers, but teachers will be employed through the ISD.
And you'll, with appropriate financial support, handle the school funding,
Yes, sir.
which is different than the way most charter management organizations.
Yes.
Another reason why this is a difficult task, I think. With appropriate support, you'll monitor and assess and provide oversight of the operator. Okay, and continue to do your fine work in the community. I have no doubt with what's on the right-hand side of the chart. I mean, I think it's a monumental climb, but I think we'll get there. This may be more of a question for our legal staff, but what would it take for our ISD superintendent to hire the principal? I personally would have much more confidence in this if I knew Dr. Hall was making that decision.
Is that a question our legal staff can answer at this time?
If I could say, I would think that you have veto power.
The legislation is fairly specific around this part, Chairman. It says that the operator hires the principal, but one of the differentiators for me when we look at the operators is that AAC was very explicit about engaging the community and the ISD in the selection of the principal.
I don't think they're going to select anybody that you don't believe is a person could get the job done, because that'd be the first
Sure.
mark against them.
I agree with you, Mr. Chair, but it's not just making a selection, it's who is the principal working for? And that's where I have confidence in Mr. Hall.
I think Mr. Snyder's going to answer.
With respect to some of these legal questions, we're happy to talk with you in closed sessions about those, or individually as the case may come up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it? Okay, we've heard all of this, we've had a lot of discussion. Dr. Hall, in light of these concerns, I would like to request that you come back tomorrow with your recommendation, but would you consider another recommendation maybe that tweaks the original recommendation? Are there some alternatives that we can look at? Well, you may have a unanimous right now with your original recommendation, but for the trepidation and concerns, we want this to work. And you've said we want this to be different than in other states. We've all read the articles about other states. Can you put on your creativity hat and bring us another recommendation also?
With your permission, as long as I can engage with the state board attorneys to see what other legal options are available. But I do think we've exhausted some of that with the attorneys and trying to understand what options are there. at least under current statute. But to your point, Ms. Taylor, I think something that sets us apart from any other state is this framework here, and the fact that it does place accountability in a completely different place, and it sets us up as an LEA. I mean, we are truly like a statewide school district, accountable to the same standards, the same laws, and that leads into another point that I'll be back before this board in a couple seconds on to discuss.
Madam Chair, I just want to say I don't think my questions can be answered by tomorrow.
Okay.
I appreciate your total honesty when I said, how will we meet those? And you said, and you named a couple of models. One is the contract and meeting those things, or there's some others, and you said there is even some others. I think I just have to have more definition there. So I want to just say that. I can't, I need to hear, even questions about, what's the payment process? Who gets, we have a contract with, now we would have a contract with AAC, the state.
Yes, sir.
And then AAC has a contract with CFA. Is all of that transparent?
It is. As a matter of fact, in CFA's contract with AAC, they are doing the services that they provide at no
Even
charge.
how much employees make? There's been a lot of rhetoric around that in some other areas, so I just want to make sure we know.
We would not necessarily know salaries of employees, hired. We would know the salary of the principal that's employed, because the principal's contract by statute has to be posted on our website.
Well, again, the broader questions of in the detail of how's payment made, who makes it, all those things is just part of the.
Okay, I do think we've kind of exhausted this.
I'm exhausted.
I wish we had had more time for discussion. So this will come back tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Yes, ma'am.
Could we have 5 minutes, Mr.
All
Chair?
right, let's move on to, don't go anywhere, Dr.
Move
Hall.
forward.
EICS
It's
2, the ISD request for waiver and exemptions from the state laws and the State Board of Education policies for the innovative school at Southside Ashpole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very succinct on this request. Within the statute, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, the ISD is held to the same standard as every other LEA in the state. With that, we have an opportunity within the statute to request the same flexibilities, very similar to the restarts. So to be able to have the flexibilities from state board rule or from state statute, but we cannot do anything any less than what a charter school is required to in the state. And so the request would be, as we look at compensation models, for example, on how we pay teachers or how we might pay the principal or staff members at the school, scheduling flexibility, those pieces, as we're continuing to iron out with an operator, how this will look inside the scope of operating a school. I bring this waiver before the board because if we are at a point where we can start hiring teachers over the next 30 to 45 days, this would be a significant piece of the equation on how we can offer teachers a salary based on the flexibilities afforded through this waiver. And so my request for waiver is simply based on the fact that we would ask for the same flexibilities afforded a charter school, again, very similar to the restart model and how that waiver's afforded.
Okay. I think that one's pretty clear cut.
Thank you.
We will vote on that item tomorrow. Our final item is EICS 4, the 2018 Charter Schools Timeline, Charter Agreement and Application Process, and Dr. Deanna Townsend Smith will present this item.
Good afternoon. I will try to be brief. Chair Taylor, Chairman Colby, Superintendent Johnson, and other members of the board. I am pleased to say that the 2018 Charter School application timeline and process will be the same for 3 years in a row. So that process is normalizing, and we are seeing the results of that, as you heard earlier from Chairman Quigley's presentation. So the specific changes to the timeline and process are just date changes, as everything else pretty much remains the same. And then the other part of the request is the changes to the charter agreement. We do these changes every year. Those changes are specifically the date changes to the charter agreement, the change that aligns the grade enrollment expansion to statute, and then the piece about who can approve what parts of the amendments. Remember, we approved, we made changes to the to the charter, one of the charter policies around grade enrollment expansion when the statute changed. And so now that piece just aligns everything accordingly. And so that's our request about the charter application timeline and process and the charter agreement.
Any questions? This will return in May, so thank you very much.
That was fast.
Chairman Kobe, that does conclude our.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I'd like to just commend Becky's leadership. She has put hours and hours and hours and hours and really struggled with this, and both in ways that none of us, and I couldn't imagine. Donnie finally got up and walked out.
He did.
Her husband's with her here today, but I just wanted to commend her because she has really put a lot of work into this.
Here, here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not an easy job, and
Thank
she
you,
gets
Ms.
paid.
Taylor. And thanks to all the presenters, particularly the ones that had to travel here to be with us. Board members, that concludes our committee meeting for the day. If there are no additional items for discussion at this time, I ask for a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. McDevitt.
I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to discuss personnel matters and to consult with our attorneys on attorney-client privilege matters, including the handling of the following cases: Hope County versus State of North Carolina and North Carolina State Board of Education; Carter G. Woodson School versus North Carolina State Board of Education and the Charter School Advisory Board; Heritage Collegiate Leadership Academy versus North Carolina State Board of Education; and Kia Scott Andrews versus North Carolina State Board of Education. Move we go in.
Motion by Mr. McDevitt, second by Mr. Alcorn, reminding the public that once we come out of closed session and go into open session, we will immediately adjourn. So there will be no public part of our meeting again today, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So all those in favor of the motion to go into closed session, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. We will go into closed session at 10 minutes.